Please like and share, invite people. All right, y'all. Let's move on to another story that's been all over the news, all over the feed in the last couple days, and that is just a heartbreaking story, really. For a few reasons. One, because I remember when this happened in 2023 and just how brutal it was. And then also, though, because as somebody who doesn't believe in prisons, as a prison abolitionist, it's always hard to see a system that you don't even think can facilitate justice absolutely refuse to even try to. That's heartbreaking. I can't imagine what he's a father, he's a son, he's a partner, a husband. I can't imagine what Tyre Nichols' family is feeling right now in these moments, right? But so let's talk about what happened. Yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, a jury acquitted 3 of the police officers who were involved in beating Tyre Nichols to death in 2023. Y'all remember this? This was in Memphis. It was a traffic stop and was caught on tape. And man, it was brutal. It was brutal, right? To be acquitted of participation of all charges, they didn't even find them guilty of any other ones, any of the lesser charges. There was absolutely no consequences from our system regarding this death. And that should be dumbfounding to folks. That should be absolutely dumbfounding to folks. But a lot of folks are pointing to it and saying, see, this isn't about race. And they're pointing to that because the cops were black and Tyre Nichols is black. And they're saying, see, this is not about race. And to that, I say, hold on, y'all, pump your brakes. Because it most certainly is. It most certainly is. For 2 reasons that I want to talk about. And the first is pretty straightforward. And so I want to start with that. 1, this jury was not from Memphis. This jury was from the Chattanooga area. And the judge ordered that to guarantee a fair trial and all that. They are all white. This was an all-white jury. Okay. And that's important to keep in mind because white folks are more likely to perpetuate whiteness, to make sense of the world through a whiteness frame, to accept that without any critical thought than other folks are, right? We're encouraged, we're incentivized to do that. But we're not the only ones, right? And so it's important to note that 12 white people thought that the brutal beating to death of a black man didn't warrant any consequences. That's an important thing to take note of and to track. Absolutely an important thing to take note of and to track. The other way that this is connected to race is because we have to understand, again, now remember, awareness, analysis, action, and accountability. So let's be aware that policing starts from perhaps the most explicit enforcement of white supremacy that you could think of. And that is the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act. That is to say, the enforcement of the institution of slavery. They were paying European folks, white folks, Irish folks, Italian folks, those ones that were, all right, maybe we're white, maybe we're not. Let's see if they can get with it. Those were the people that became the first police force, and they were the ones that were enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act, the returning of enslaved Africans who had escaped bondage back to the plantations where they were enslaved in, right? And so just right there, policing in and of it, the act of policing is racialized. It's racially coded. But you might be inclined to be like, Ryan, that was so long ago. Slavery is over, all that. Cool. Well, then let's also be aware and deepen our analysis of what's happening. And let's be aware and acknowledge that race and whiteness and its creation was constructed to limit access to the mainstream economy and guarantee wealth accumulation for a very small fragment of the population. White, wealthy men, landowning men, right? That's why the definition of white has been very narrow. It's expanded in order to keep the social order intact. But it expands reluctantly, and it vets the people that it includes in it. Absolutely, right? And so, if we understand that, then we understand that the police have always been more aligned with the interests and the well-being of elite property owners, and indeed of property itself. Remember, enslaved Africans were considered property by enslavers, by those despicable, socially deranged, morally bankrupt white folks who were owning other human beings. They were considered property. The role of the police has always been to protect property, to protect economic assets. That is not different today. That is 100% not different today. I implore anybody to show me where have the police, for example, arrested a CEO who's turned a blind eye to working conditions that result in death. Hasn't happened. Where have the police stepped in and demanded that a slumlord do what's right by their tenants? I won't hold my breath for that one either. Okay, those things just don't happen, right? And those are independent of individuals within the police force motivation or what they believe they're doing. This is systemic. The role of the police is that, right? And so whiteness doesn't care who enforces that social order. It absolutely does not care who enforces it. And so the fact that black men enforce the social order and were the leading edge of taking the life of another person and entering into a system where that life does not matter, doesn't matter to the system. As a matter of fact, the whiteness loves that, because now we're having this conversation. Because now we're having a conversation about, does race matter here? When the entire institution is predicated on the protection of whiteness and the wealth and the access to material resources that whiteness offers. That is why this is 100% about race. This is 100% about whiteness. The fact that 12 white people saw 3 black men enforce the most vicious manifestations of white supremacy by beating another black man to death, and they did not care about the life of that black man, lets you know that this is about race. It also lets you know everything you need to know about whiteness and the ways that whiteness erodes our humanity, erodes our moral compass, and results in degradation and in nonsense like Lily Gaddis, right? And the Trump administration and all these goofballs, Matt Walsh, who running around, all this. It's nonsense. It should be a non-starter for all of us, right? And I say that because not necessarily reluctantly, but holding tension, because the reality is this system is incapable of producing the things that Tyre Nichols' family or that Tyre Nichols himself deserved. If we really cared about these things, we would go look at what is behind behind the violence and the hatred and the rage that those cops had to have felt. What is behind why we're policing in the way that we're policing? What is behind the disparities and the just deplorable living conditions that so many of our countrymen, we care about our citizens. Supposedly these people care about Americans. They're Americans and we don't care about them. We don't care about poor people. We don't care about that. If we wanted to stop this type of violence, we would look at the harm that causes this type of violence and we would work there. But we don't. The criminal justice system isn't concerned with that. It isn't concerned with repair. It isn't concerned with restoring a just social order. It is concerned with maintaining itself, maintaining the social order, hoarding of resources, hoarding of wealth, hoarding of opportunities, and the exploitation of everybody else. Okay. And no other story illustrates this more clearly than Rodney Hinton Jr. Now, Rodney Hinton Jr. is a 38-year-old man in Cincinnati. He allegedly ran over a retired deputy who was doing traffic. He ran him over and killed him. the day after seeing the body cam footage of Cincinnati police shooting and killing his son, Ryan Hinton. And by all accounts, he was distraught about that and didn't know what to do. And this was his reaction. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not justifying his reaction. I do not believe that in an eye for an eye. I don't believe that. I'm also not saying that y'all should. I don't, or that you shouldn't, right? Here's why I want to talk about this today is that this is the inevitable and entirely predictable end game of our system. More Rodney Hinton Juniors will take place if we don't figure out how to be in community with each other. If we don't figure out how to do this thing right. And that is really what we need to work on. We need to figure out what is going on, right? Because the police somehow manage to apprehend the Dylan Roofs of the world and actually treat them with dignity, get them food, things like that. They manage that, and they can't manage to save the life of a black teenager, right? Now, I'm also not saying they said that he pointed a gun. I've seen the body cam footage. You can't really tell. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to excuse that behavior, whatever happened there. What I am saying is that, again, the root causes of this incident are not in that car. They're also not in the Hinton household. The root causes are much deeper. They're systemic and they're societal, and we all have a stake in finding out what they are and fixing them, addressing them, getting to a place where we can work at repair, work at restoration, and do something different, so that we don't see not only any more acts of violence like Rodney Hinton and that deputy. Salute, condolences to their family, but also that we don't see any more Ryan Hintons, and also that we don't see any more juries like the one that acquitted Tyre Nichols killers, and also that we don't see any more. Oh, let me get this banner right. That we don't see any more nonsense like Shiloh Hendricks. All of these things are connected, and we have to be aware of them. We have to have an analysis that sees those connections. Then we have to take action that interrupts those connections, and then we have to hold each other accountable to those values. Apparently, we all say we have values around, unity and love and acceptance and all that. Then we need to walk that talk, right? We need to walk that talk. That starts with truthful tellings of history. That starts with analysis that take in the reality of everybody involved in any given situation. And it starts with staying engaged with each other, y'all. It starts with staying engaged with each other. So that's the show tonight, y'all. That's the show tonight. Thank you for being here. Again, if you're catching this after the fact, thank you for being here. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It really, really means a lot. And we'll see you next week for the antidote. Peace. Go Wolves.